Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new YouTube video. Today, we're going to be talking about cell biology. Cell biology, there's always a couple of questions on the OGTs about that, so it's really important to know a little bit. So, to begin, I'm actually going to use my really horrible drawing skills, and I'm going to give you a visual of the two different types of cells that you really need to know about. So I'm going to try to draw. There's two different types of cells that are always a part of the OGTs, and that's prokaryote and eukaryote. We're going to start with the prokaryote. Actually, we're going to start with this blank screen because that's how everything starts, is nothing. And we're going to create some life. Even if it's going to be a little bit sloppy. I'm not an artist, just to throw that out there. So the first thing I'm going to start with, and let me just write this on here. If I can figure out how to do a box here. We're going to do a prokaryote cell. Also, why I'm trying to write this out, if you don't have a pen and paper with you or a notebook, it's a really, I'm not sure I'm spelling that right. Let me make sure I have the right spelling. You really do need to take notes, and I'm not, see, I forgot an R here. So go grab a notebook and a pen, and make sure that you have that ready to go. You're going to want to take notes. Okay, so prokaryote cell is, the prefix pro means before, and so the prokaryote cell comes before the eukaryote, which we will talk about next. But the important thing to remember about prokaryote cells is they are the oldest cells on the planet that we know of. Like, they are much more simplistic than eukaryote cells. Prokaryote cells, you tend to be bacteria or archaea cells, and they have they perform many less functions. They're usually unicellular, meaning that they're just they kind of perform independent of each other. So let's draw a cell wall here. Okay, and then importantly, like one of the biggest differences between a prokaryote and a eukaryote cell is this right here that I'm going to draw. Like, this is great. This is the DNA of the cell. And a prokaryote cell, it just kind of floats in the middle here. It's the DNA is the map of a cell. So this is the blueprint. This is what, when a cell is created, this is the DNA will tell it exactly how to replicate, what to replicate, and what it's going to look like, and what it's going to do. So that's the DNA sitting right in the middle there. And that is the most important difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote, because a eukaryote cell, this is all enclosed in a membrane, and I will show you that. Prokaryote cells also often have what's called flagella, which is like a little tail there. The flagella helps the prokaryote cell swim. So, like, I like to think of it as like flagella is like FLAGELLA, and it waves like a flag. And as it waves back and forth, it pushes itself around, right? So this is what provides locomotion. Right inside here is what you call cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is where all the organelles kind of float around. It's exactly how it sounds. It's a gel-like substance, and it actually has like some chemical properties in it that help the cells perform, or the organelles perform its functions. And by the way, organelles are like the organs of a cell. So they're called organelles. We have organs, cells have organelles. Now, what prokaryotes and eukaryotes both have, and I'm going to try to make these tiny little dots, these are called ribosomes. And there's lots of them. And ribosomes they perform functions of protein. They make protein, basically. They synthesize protein. So, and I'm going to, as we go along, I'm going to give you some clues on how to remember what ribosomes are, because I have like a really good tip for remembering that. Now I'm going to try to draw these little hair-like substances here. I'm not going to do it around the whole cell, but these would be around the whole cell. These are called cilia. Cilia also helps the cell move around, and it does that by waving itself through like whatever medium it's in, whether that be water. You can pretend like this is some kind of bacteria that's in water. Well, it floats. It gets around by waving these back and forth. Now, some cells have both cilia and flagellum, and others just have cilia, and others just have flagellum. So they don't necessarily have both of these properties, but they'll have one or the other, or maybe none at all. So this is your prokaryote. Pro meaning before, and then before eukaryote. So let's get over to the eukaryote cell. This is how I like to remember eukaryote. A eukaryote cell is you. So you are made out of eukaryote cells. Eukaryote cells are much more complex. They all plants and animals and fungi are made out of eukaryote cells. Eukaryote cells are able to perform more complex functions. And so and they're able to do this because of a certain thing, and I'm going to try to draw it. I'm going to draw a circle in here. Okay, it's just going to be a circle. But actually, all inside of this circle, this is where all the DNA is embedded. So all the DNA is inside of this nuclear membrane. Okay, so I'm going to write that down. If you're watching this in March of 2021, this is a question on the OGT test, I believe. And that is, what is the biggest difference between the prokaryote or eukaryote? Not the biggest difference, but what divides the prokaryote from the eukaryote cell? And it's the nuclear membrane. The nuclear membrane encloses that DNA, and it helps it to carry out more complex functions. Now, there's a lot of different organelles inside of a cell, by the way, a lot, okay? I'm not going to go over all of those because you're not going to really need to know them for the OGTs. I'm going to touch on some of them at the end of this, but for the sake of the OGTs, they do ask about a pretty predictable number of organelles, and those are the ones I'm going to go over. Again, eukaryote cells have ribosomes. Remember, ribosomes are protein synthesis. There's lots of these in here. Proteins are essential to life, by the way. And so, you know, all cells have these. They're not long like that. They're just these little dots, okay? These are the ribosomes. And then one really cool thing, probably my personal favorite organelle, is called a mitochondria. And I'm going to draw it just like this. Mitochondria are super interesting to me. You've probably heard of them before as being the powerhouse of a cell. Mitochondria make ATP. So whenever I'm lifting weights, I think of my mitochondria, because when you're lifting weights, your cells go through what's called the Krebs cycle. And what that is your mitochondria makes ATP. And let's write this down, because ATP is your energy source for your cells. So your mitochondria makes that ATP, and that's your energy. So you're lifting weights, you're using ATP. It gives your muscles flexibility. And then once you run out of ATP, that's when you start to get tired and you can't lift anymore. Your brain will be like, keep lifting, but you can't, because you've run out of that energy store. Well, you know, you stop and you wait, 30 seconds to a minute or 5 minutes, depending on what kind of lifting you're doing, and your body's able to generate more ATP. So your ATP goes through a Krebs cycle, so it turns into ADP and then mixes with phosphorus and creatine and then goes back into ATP. So you stop and you rest a minute, your muscles create, or your cells create more ATP, and you're able to lift again. So that is all because of mitochondria. Mitochondria are really cool. They actually have a little bit of DNA in here themselves. They're like cells inside of cells. They're my favorite organelle for sure. And then there's a lot of other different organelles, and we're going to briefly touch on those. But for the sake of the OGT, you really need to remember ribosomes. I'm going to just put rib here. We'll go over this more extensively for sure. But you've got to remember these ribosomes, nuclear membrane. Your DNA is inside of the nuclear membrane, and then you have your mitochondria. This is your cell wall. Your cell wall is actually something you probably think is just natural, which it is, but it actually allows things in and allows things out. So all the waste of the cell goes out through the cell membrane, and then the cell membrane is incredibly important. It's like a protective barrier and only lets certain things inside the cell, like it gives it permission. And that's one way that these fight off like infections from viruses and different bacteria. So the cell wall is pretty important. Again, we have cytoplasm in here. What's something else important that I can tell you about in here? Like I said, there are a lot of different organelles inside of a eukaryote cell for sure. We have the endoplasmic reticulum, and we have Golgi apparatus and all that, and we'll go over that just a tiny little bit. But I really want you to remember these for now. These are the really important parts, and the parts that I have seen most often on the OGTs. So I'm going to bring over a presentation here. We're going to do some vocabulary words. Hold on a second. Let's start this over. Present from beginning. Okay, we're going to do some vocabulary words. This is where I really, really want you to take notes and put these on some index cards and just do your best to remember these. These are going to be really useful to you when you take the OGTs. So we're going to start with this prokaryote cell, just like we did in my diagram I just did. It's before you, okay, eukaryote, and I spelled eukaryote there wrong. I could see that. There's no large membrane bound structures. What that means is there's no mitochondria and there's no nuclear membrane. It's all just kind of floating around like willy-nilly. You can see that right here. Here's your DNA, here's your ribosomes, and they just kind of float around in the plasma here. So prokaryotes are typically bacteria. Remember, they're the oldest living cells that we know of. They have free-floating DNA and often have flagellum. Here's the flagellum. Remember I said that waves like a flag. That's how it moves around. And then this is the cilia here. And the cilia just waves like hair-like structures. There are some eukaryote cells that have some of these same properties. For instance, as you know, the sperm has a flagellum. That's how it swims, right? And then we also have some eukaryote cells that have these hair-like structures, like in our lungs, we have like little hair-like structures that help move the passage of oxygen. And then we have a few cells that have some of this. So they aren't intrinsic only to prokaryote cells, but prokaryote cells do need these to move around. What else can I tell you about these? They're more simplistic. Like I said, they're unicellular, meaning they just kind of live on their own, and they typically are bacteria. Okay, so now we're going to move on to what we're made out of. It's not just us, it's all plants too, fungi and protists, and they're all made out of eukaryote cells, much more complicated. They have more organelles, and they're bound within membranes. So here I have complex, look for cell membranes, and they have more organelles, and they're pretty crazy looking, like these. These guys right here, these are your mitochondria, and always the little dots are your ribosomes. And then here's your Golgi apparatus, and I'll go over that in a little bit. You don't really need to know what those are for the OGTs. They don't typically ask about them, but here is, where's your DNA? It's right inside here. It's bound up inside here, which is a huge protective measure. And so just remember that that is what really divides a eukaryote from a prokaryote cell. Here's another diagram of the eukaryote cell, and you can see that here's your DNA right here. This one actually gives you a visual. This is called a nucleoid. Mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, and this is your endoplasmic reticulum. We're not going to go into that too much. I don't want you to get confused, but those are what you really need to know. So, take good notes on this. Mitochondria, like I said, most people know that as the powerhouse of the cell. You can think of it as mighty. You think of it with your muscles. It powers your muscles. It powers your cells. So mighty mitochondria. And if you remember, it generates the ATP. You might see the word ATP on the OGT. It is just talking about that is the energy source used for cells. Okay, nuclear membrane. All eukaryotic cells have a nuclear membrane. The DNA is inside of the nuclear membrane, and the membrane is what allows the cell to perform complex actions. Here's how complex. There's a name for every little teeny tiny part of a cell. You really don't need to know all of these, but you do just need to know that we have a nucleus here, nuclear membrane. Ribosomes, this is where I told you I was going to help you remember how to remember what a ribosome is. This is how I initially remembered a ribosome. This little prefix here, rib, we got some ribs. Ribs are meat, and meat is protein. That's what your ribosomes do, is they perform protein functions. They synthesize your protein. So pretty important. All cells have ribosomes. The flagella, that waves around like a flag to move. And here we've got some examples of flagella on some bacteria here. Don't ask me what these are. I have no idea. This one has I guess these are all technically flagella, but yeah, they just wave around. That's how they move. DNA is your blueprint to existence. And if you see, there's sometimes the question, it's just important to be able to differentiate between a DNA and mitochondria. Some people get it confused. So just remember, your DNA is literally your blueprint. And I like this graphic here because you've got your cell. Here's your nucleus. Your DNA is right inside here. This is a chromosome. And if you've ever done tutoring with me, and I'll do another tutorial on Punnett squares and chromosomes and DNA. But this is your chromosome, which your DNA is made out of a series of chromosomes. And here's your DNA here. This is called the double helix, and your genes are right inside here. And that's what makes you you. And then we have your RNA. Your RNA is a messenger. It carries instructions from your DNA and controls the synthesis of proteins, your ribosomes. So the RNA acts as a translator. And you can kind of see here, you have your DNA transcription, your mRNA translation into protein. But just think of it as your messenger. It's very, very connected to your DNA. So just remember, the two are very, very connected, but your RNA is a transcriber. Just remember the difference of that, and make sure you write that down. One more thing you need to know, and we're going to talk about plant cells. I've seen a couple of plant cell questions on the OGTs. If you can remember, chloroplasts are always related to photosynthesis. Those are only intrinsic to plants. Only plants have chloroplasts. It's what enables them to make their own food. Plants are also called producers. They don't need anything else to help them survive except for the sun and water. And it uses that to make their own food, which is really quite remarkable if you stop to think about it. They don't need to go out and do any hunting and gathering. So starvation is not, the only way they're going to starve to death is if they don't have sun and water. So plant cells have one special thing about them. They can make their own food with organelles called chloroplasts. Those are those green things in here. That's what gives them their color green. Chloroplasts enables photosynthesis, which takes the energy from the sun and converts it into chemical energy. If we could all do that, there would be no starvation. And now I just wanted to give you an actual like visual of a cell, because it's all great to talk about these things and then to see my horrible drawings. But this is an actual picture of a cell. And you can see how complex they are and how many organelles are inside of them. As you know, we can't see these with our own eyes. So it's really cool to just kind of have a visual of what this all looks like under a microscope. So you've got your Golgi bodies here, which I just like the name of those. And then your endoplasmic reticulum, they're just kind of like folds. They do a lot of like translation in your cells. Here's your mighty powerhouse mitochondria and all these other ones. I don't even know what this one is. We don't need to know what those are for the sake of the OGTs, but here's your visual of what a cell looks like. And I wanted to do this little quiz here. I think I actually closed it. I don't know if I can open this. Because it actually gives you like some more visuals of cells. So we're going to do this quiz really quick. So many cells are easily identifiable by their shapes. Here we see some human cells. Even if you don't know exactly what they are, some thinking about the purpose of these cells should tell you which these are. I looked at these. I kind of knew these were blood platelets just because I've seen them before in pictures, but this is what your blood cells look like. Here we see a point where 3 cells meet. An expert might recognize the species, but just from the look of the division between the cells, you can safely state that these are from which type of life. And I chose a plant cell, and I could just tell because these look like chloroplasts for me. And then plant cells always have this kind of division here between them, as we saw in that picture before. Let's see. The internal structures can also sometimes tell you a lot about a cell. And in this case, one of these 4 structures is not something you would normally see in a cell: at rest. Which one of them tells the cell sleuth something, and what is the verdict? I chose this cell's been infected by a virus because this number 1 right here, that looks like a virus to me. Here we have a rather large cell organelle that clearly shows some subdivision. It is also something a human cell usually has exactly one of. Which is it? That's a nucleus for sure. Human cells definitely don't have chloroplasts. We have several ribosomes, and that's not a microtubule, so I chose the nucleus. I missed one of these, and I can't remember which one, but I'll figure it out. This organelle looks almost like a fingerprint, but it is rather a network to which other very small but important cell components attach while doing their function. Its name also suggests little network. Which organelle is it? That's your endoplasmic reticulum. And you can just remember that because they look like little folds together here. So that is your endoplasmic reticulum. This image belongs to the same cell as the one before up here, but here there are black structures embedded. They are not attached to the network, but just happen to be here because the network needs a lot of energy. What is the name of these organelles? Well, I knew right away that was mitochondria, because it needed energy, and mitochondria provides energy. This is not a detached part of the cellular component seen in question 5, but rather a different organelle whose main function is to transport vesicles, capsules containing important chemicals to their destination. What is What is its rather mechanical name? That's your Golgi apparatus, which just has, to me, like the coolest organelle name. But it does do just that. It transports vesicles and chemicals. So that's your Golgi apparatus. Here we're looking at a rather rare perspective of one particular organelle that actually has the shape of a drinking straw. The photo shows one of its ends and its microstructure involving 9 small bundles of what again looks like straws. The name of this organelle is misleading. Consider it rather organizes the peripheral of the structure of the cell. What do you see here? I chose the centriole. I think I got this one wrong, but I can't remember. So I don't know if that's right or not. We'll check at the end. Actually, this is the one I got wrong because I think this was HIV. Something is happening here. What is going on in this particular picture? The process is definitely more advantageous to the particles, to these guys on the left and the mass on the right. So this is a cell, and these are the HIV viruses infecting the cell. So not something you want to happen, but really cool to see under a microscope. And by the way, I just chose this quiz because I wanted you to see what these all look like under a microscope. And then 10, finally, let's look at some chromosomes. These 3 chromosome pairs have been taken from a human karyotype image. Which of the following statements about them is definitely wrong? So I looked at these. I was able to figure this out. I know that B is that this is your female and male chromosome. And if they look different, like this is your male one, I think, I knew that this is a male. So pair B identifies the individual as a male. Yes. Pair C shows chromosome 22. Well, I knew that your sex chromosome is chromosome 22. So I knew that that one was wrong. Pair 8, A shows chromosome 18. I really didn't know that, but I knew that one was wrong. The individual whose chromosomes are shown has a genetic disorder, and I can tell that. So these were my answers. We'll submit my answers. Oh, this is the one that I got wrong. Okay, I couldn't remember. I think I had 2 wrong. Okay, yeah, so I got them all right except for number 3. But anyway, it doesn't matter. That is what your cells look like under a microscope. So pretty cool. And I think that's the end of my presentation and the end of this first updated YouTube video, which we really needed. So thank you, everyone. And as always, if you have any questions, reach out to me directly. And okay, have a great day.